woman will destroy you! What? Oh my God!
Who is this child?
That woman will destroy you, the 8-year-old said, and the entire chapel went silent. 120 guests. A bride in a $40,000 dress. A groom with his hand already lifted to slide a ring onto her finger. And one small girl in a faded yellow cardigan, standing alone in the center aisle, saying 6 words nobody in that room was prepared to hear. Nobody laughed. That was the part that should have told them everything. 20 minutes earlier, nobody in that chapel had any idea her name was Michelle. The string quartet had started the processional right on time, the way Charleston weddings always do when the bride's mother has spent 11 months planning every second of it. Dominic Reyes stood at the altar with his hands clasped in front of him, trying to keep them still. He told himself it was nerves. Every groom got nerves. He was 34, he'd built Reyes Coastal Properties out of nothing but a contractor's license and 4 years sleeping in his truck between jobs, and he had never once let anyone see his hands shake. Not in front of bankers, not in front of his father, who told him at 19 he'd amount to nothing but sawdust and debt. But here, with Vanessa Calloway 30 seconds from walking toward him in white, his hands would not behave. Then she appeared at the end of the aisle, and every doubt in him went quiet. She was, without exaggeration, the most beautiful thing he had ever watched move through a room. Her eyes found his and held there warm, certain, the way they always did. He thought, I am the luckiest man in this state. He believed it completely. She reached him, took his hands. Hers were cool, dry, perfectly still. Hi, she whispered. Hi, he whispered back, and the whole room narrowed to just the two of them. Reverend Hall opened his book. Vows, a reading about love being patient. Dom barely heard any of it. He was watching the small muscle at the corner of Vanessa's jaw, memorizing the gold light on her shoulders, thinking I want to remember every second of this. Then Reverend Hall closed the book partway, the way he always did at this point, more ritual than expectation. If anyone here has any reason why this man and this woman should not be joined together in marriage, he said, in the voice of a man who'd said it 1,000 times and never once expected an answer, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. 2 seconds of silence, the kind nobody ever fills. He had already drawn breath to continue when a small voice cut through it from the back of the chapel. Wait! It wasn't loud. That was what made it terrifying. It wasn't a shout. It was just clear, the way a child's voice carries over noise it has no business carrying over. Every head turned. A little girl was walking up the aisle alone. 8 years old, maybe. Faded yellow cardigan. Hair in 2 careful braids somebody had taken real time with that morning. Small white sneakers making no sound at all on the runner laid down for the bride. Dom recognized her vaguely, the granddaughter of one of the venue's cleaning staff, the one who'd sat quietly drawing in the kitchen hallway during rehearsal. A woman near the back, older, in a plain navy uniform, half rose out of her seat, one hand reaching, her face gone the color of ash. Michelle. Just that. One word. The sound of someone who already knows it's too late. But Michelle kept walking. She stopped 10 feet from the altar, close enough that Dom could see her hands were knotted together so tight her knuckles had gone pale. Close enough to see she was terrified. She didn't run, and she didn't look at Vanessa. She looked straight at Dom. That woman will destroy you, she said.
What?
Vanessa's hand, still resting in his, went rigid.
Who is this child?
He felt it before he understood it. The sudden, total stillness of her fingers, like something had locked shut inside her. He glanced sideways, and for less than a second, something moved across her face that he had never seen there in 14 months of knowing her. Not embarrassment. Not the awkwardness of a stranger's child interrupting her wedding. Fear. Then it was gone, smoothed flat, replaced by the graceful, practiced half-smile she wore for cameras and donors and his mother. Oh, sweetheart, Vanessa said, soft, indulgent, the voice of a good sport. That's all right. 2 security men were already moving up the side aisle. The grandmother had reached the girl now, her hand closing on her shoulder, her whisper sharp and frantic. I'm so sorry, sir. I'm so sorry, ma'am. She didn't mean. But Michelle didn't move. She kept her eyes on Dom like he was the only person in the room. "I'm not lying," she said, her voice cracking on the second word. The first sign the courage holding her together was costing her something real. "I heard her. I heard what she said." "Heard what?" The words left Dom before Theo's hand could land warning on his arm, before Reverend Hall could smooth it over and move them along. It wasn't supposed to matter. A confused kid, a story half understood, twisted into something dramatic. But some part of him, the part that had built a company on knowing the difference between a nervous contractor and a lying one, needed to ask. "Heard what?" he said again. The grandmother's grip tightened. "She's 8, sir. She gets things mixed up. Please, we'll leave right now." "I'm not asking you." He looked back at the girl, his voice gentler now. "I'm asking her." Michelle looked at him for a long moment. Something in her face reminded him, painfully, of the way his little sister used to look at their father right before getting in trouble for telling the truth nobody wanted. "She said," Michelle whispered, "that once she had your name, she wouldn't need you anymore." The chapel didn't breathe. Vanessa let out a short, bright laugh, the kind built to dissolve tension in a room full of people who'd paid for catering. "I have never said anything of the sort," she said, looking around at her guests with wide, wounded eyes. "I don't even know this child." "She's not lying," the grandmother said, and her voice, though shaking, had an edge underneath it that surprised everyone, including, it seemed, herself. "I'm sorry to do this here. I am. But my granddaughter does not lie, and I will not stand in this room and let anyone call her one." Vanessa's smile thinned, just barely, just enough. And that was the moment. Not the wedding, not the vows, not the kiss that came 40 minutes later because nobody in that family had ever learned how to stop a moving train once the band was already paid for. That was the moment everything Dominic Reyes thought he knew about the woman he loved quietly began to come apart, 1 inch at a time, starting with a half-second flicker on her face that a frightened 8-year-old had seen coming from a mile away. He married her anyway. He would spend the rest of his life understanding exactly why that decision haunted him more than anything Vanessa Calloway ever did to him directly, because somewhere underneath the vows and the first dance and his mother's performed, happy tears into a monogram napkin, he knew. He felt it the way you feel a storm before the sky changes. And he stepped into the water anyway, because admitting a child had seen something he'd missed felt, in that moment, more humiliating than whatever was coming for him next. The reception was held in the same garden where they'd taken their engagement photos. String lights strung between live oaks, a band playing covers of songs Vanessa's mother approved of. Dom danced the first dance with his hand at the small of Vanessa's back and her cheek against his jaw, and somewhere over her shoulder he caught sight of the venue staff clearing tables near the kitchen entrance. Ruth among them, moving fast, head down, the particular careful posture of someone trying to be invisible after having been, for one unforgivable minute, the opposite. He should have gone to her that night. He told himself that for months afterward, lying awake beside a woman who slept like she'd never once doubted herself in her life. He should have crossed that garden in his rented tuxedo and found Ruth among the folding chairs and said something, anything, to make the humiliation smaller. He didn't. He let his mother's voice in his head, "Don't make a scene, Dominic, not tonight," win the way it had won most of his life, and he danced and he smiled for the photographer, and underneath all of it the stone in his chest sat exactly where Michelle had placed it. It would not stay quiet for long. The first 6 weeks of the marriage looked, on paper, exactly like what he'd signed up for. Vanessa was warm in public and efficient in private, the kind of wife who could host 12 investors for dinner and make everyone feel like the guest of honor. She redecorated his office without asking, and somehow it was better than what had been there. She remembered his mother's medication schedule better than his mother did. It was the small things that started it, each one small enough to explain away. It was only later, lined up end to end, that they looked like anything at all. The housekeeper, Ruth, he'd learn her name eventually, though it took longer than it should have, had cleaned for Vanessa's parents 9 years before the wedding. 2 weeks after the ceremony, she was let go. No warning. A single line in an email about restructuring household staff. Dom only found out because his mother mentioned it at brunch, almost as an aside, between a forkful of eggs and a complaint about the valet. Vanessa's mother finally let that cleaning woman go, she said. The one whose granddaughter made that scene at the wedding. About time, if you ask me. People like that always think they're owed an explanation. Dom set his coffee cup down very carefully. What scene? He said. Exactly do you think she made? His mother blinked at him, surprised by the tone. Dominic. It was an 8-year-old. Probably told to say it, or confused, or wanting attention. Children invent things, you know that. I'm sure Vanessa's mother had every reason. Did she give one? A reason? I didn't ask for one. You don't ask a woman like Eleanor Calloway to justify firing her own staff. His mother said it the way she said most things about people who worked for other people, as a fact of nature, not a decision anyone had made. Honestly, Dominic, I'd think you'd be relieved. Imagine if that little girl had kept talking. Imagine what people would have said about you. Marrying a woman whose own staff's family stands up mid-ceremony to warn me, Dom said quietly. That's the word for what she did. Not made a scene. Warned me. His mother set down her fork. You can't possibly still be thinking about this. He didn't answer her. That, in itself, was an answer. The second thing happened at a dinner 3 weeks later. A small one, 12 people, mostly Vanessa's friends from her sorority years. The kind of gathering where everyone laughed a half-second before the joke finished landing. Ruth had not yet been gone long enough for anyone to forget she existed, and somehow her name came up, one of the women asking lightly whether that whole wedding business with the little girl had ever been sorted out. Vanessa laughed, swirling her wine. Oh, that. Honestly, it's almost sweet if you think about it. A child desperate for attention, coached by a grandmother who probably saw an opportunity. People like that always think proximity to money means they're entitled to a piece of it. A few guests chuckled. Dom did not. She's 8, he said, before he could stop himself. The table went quiet for half a second, that particular half second where a room recalibrates around an unexpected note. Vanessa's smile didn't waver, but something underneath it tightened. I'm aware of how old she is, Dominic. Then maybe don't talk about her like she's running a con. I'm not talking about her, Vanessa said sweetly, reaching over to rest her hand on his. I'm talking about adults who use children to get what they want. It happens more than you'd think in certain circumstances. The pause before circumstances did more damage than the word itself. Everyone at the table understood exactly what she meant and exactly which circumstances she meant, and nobody said anything because nobody ever did. Later that night, undressing in their bedroom, Dom asked her, "Why does it bother you so much? If none of it's true." Vanessa didn't turn around. "Because I worked very hard to build the life I have, Dominic, and I am tired of people deciding they're owed a piece of it just because they once held a mop in my mother's house." She said it plainly, almost bored, the way you'd state a fact about weather. Some people think dignity is a thing you're born with. It isn't. It's something you earn by being useful to the people who already have it. Dom lay awake a long time that night, staring at the ceiling, thinking about a small girl with her knuckles gone white, walking up an aisle alone because no adult around her had been brave enough to do it for her. He found the letter by accident 2 weeks later, looking for a stapler in Vanessa's home office while she was out, and finding instead a shredder bin overflowing onto the carpet. A torn envelope on top with a return address he recognized. Ruth's. He fished out the one surviving corner. Most of the page was gone, fed through in careful strips, but a few words remained, in handwriting small and round and clearly a child's, the kind taught by teachers who still insist on cursive practice sheets. Not lying. I promise I am not lying. Please believe. When Vanessa came home and found him sitting there with the scrap laid flat on the counter, she looked at it, then at him, and that same half-second flicker crossed her face. Fear, dressed fast as composure. "You went through my trash?" she said, light, almost amused. "It wasn't in the trash. It was on the floor." He kept his voice even. "Why does a little girl's letter end up shredded in your office, Vanessa?" "Because that woman's granddaughter has been sending unsolicited letters to my family for weeks," Vanessa said, an edge sliding in under the lightness now. "Trying to extort an apology or money or something, for the inconvenience of being fired. I shredded it because it upset me." "Is that a crime?" What did it say? I didn't read the whole thing. You read enough to know you needed to destroy it. Something dropped off Vanessa's face entirely then. The warmth, gone flat all at once, like a stage light going dark between cues. I will not be interrogated in my own kitchen about a housekeeper's family drama, she said. I married you, Dominic, not the help. It was the first time he had ever heard her call anyone the help. It landed in his chest like something cracking open. He didn't sleep at all that night. He sat in his study with the scrap of paper in front of him and thought about a sentence he could not stop replaying. I promise I am not lying, please believe. Written in a child's careful hand, addressed to grown women who had every reason to listen and chose, instead, to listen to nothing but their own comfort. He thought about how easily Vanessa's family had disposed of Ruth. How easily his own mother had agreed it was for the best. How quickly, in that chapel, 120 adults had let 2 security guards walk a frightened little girl back out into the parking lot rather than spend 10 more minutes finding out if she was right. He thought, what kind of man have I let myself become, that I almost let this happen to me without ever once looking back? He drove out to find Ruth a week later, past the part of Charleston the wedding guests never saw, to a small house with a chain-link fence and a wind chime made of bottle caps. He almost turned around twice on the way, told himself it was insane, that a grown man with a company to run had no business chasing down a housekeeper's address over a scrap of shredded paper. But the stone in his chest had grown heavier than his pride, and by the time he pulled up outside the little brick house, his pride had finally quietly lost. Ruth answered the door, and the moment she saw him, her whole body went still with the same wariness he'd seen at the chapel. Mr. Reyes, she said carefully, I don't want any trouble. We've had enough of it. I'm not here to cause any, he said. I came to apologize, and to ask you something if you'll let me. She studied him the way you study a man you've learned, over a long working life, never to trust on his word alone. Then she stepped back and let the door swing open. Michelle was at the kitchen table doing homework when he stepped inside. A math worksheet covered in careful pencil numbers. She froze at the sight of him, the same braced stillness from the wedding, like she was waiting to be told, finally and officially, that she was in trouble. Are you mad at me? She asked. The question hit him harder than he expected. No, he said, crouching slightly so he wasn't looming. I'm not mad. I came to ask you to forgive me. I didn't listen to you that day. I should have. Her chin trembled. Nobody believed me. Grandma got fired because of what I said. Everybody at school says I made it up for attention. Her voice cracked. I didn't make it up. I had a sleepover invited canceled because that girl's mom said I was the one who lies about rich people. I didn't even know what that meant. I just know it's not true. Dom felt something twist hard in his chest. I believe you, he said. That's why I'm here. Ruth's eyes filled, though her voice stayed level. Sit down, Mr. Reyes, she said. I'll put on coffee. The story came out slowly, over 2 cups that went cold before either adult finished them. 3 months before the wedding, Michelle had sat quietly outside Vanessa's childhood bedroom, drawing, while Vanessa argued with someone on the phone behind a door cracked just far enough for a child 6 feet away to hear every word. She was talking about money, Michelle said, eyes down on her hands. About a man before Dom. She said once she had his name on the deed, she didn't need him to sign anything else. She paused, glanced at her grandmother, got a small nod, and kept going. Then she said it again, almost the same words. About you. I heard her say your name and laugh. Dom sat very still. I didn't understand it all, Michelle went on, but I knew it was bad. The way she said it, like she was talking about a person like they were a math problem she already solved. Ruth wiped her eyes with the corner of a dish towel. I begged her not to say anything in front of all those people, she admitted. I was afraid of exactly what happened. Nobody questions whether the bride is lying. They question whether the help's grandbaby made it up. She looked at Dom directly. But I also told her, better to tell an uncomfortable truth and be wrong than stay quiet and watch somebody get hurt because you were scared of being inconvenient. I have cleaned that family's houses for 9 years, Mr. Reyes. I have heard things in those hallways I never repeated, because repeating them would have cost me my living. I told myself silence was just part of the job. But I couldn't let my granddaughter learn that lesson too. Not about you. Not when she liked you the one time she met you at rehearsal, when you thanked her for the drawing she gave you and meant it. Dom remembered that now. A crayon drawing of a house by the water, pressed into his hand outside the kitchen the day before the wedding. For your new house, she'd said, shy and proud. He'd thanked her and meant it, and then, in the chaos of the next 24 hours, forgotten the drawing existed. Where is it? He asked suddenly. The drawing. Michelle blinked. You still want it? I never should have let it get lost in the first place. She got up and rummaged through a drawer by the refrigerator and came back with it. Slightly creased now, a crayon house with too many windows and a stick-figure family standing in front of it. 3 figures, not 2. Dom looked at the third figure for a long moment. Small, off to the side, holding something that might have been a paintbrush or might have been a flag. Who's that one? He asked. Michelle shrugged, a little embarrassed. I don't know. I guess I just thought every house needs more than 2 people in it. Otherwise it gets too quiet. Dom looked at the 8-year-old across the table, who had walked up an aisle full of strangers and risked the only stability her family had, to warn a man she'd met exactly once, and folded the drawing carefully along its existing creases, the way you fold something you intend to keep. Thank you, he said. I mean that. What came next wasn't loud. Dom was careful and methodical by nature, and he handled it the way he handled everything, alone first until he was certain. He hired a forensic accountant that same week. It didn't take long. In 8 weeks of marriage, Vanessa had moved nearly $200,000 out of a joint account he hadn't realized she had full access to. Small transfers, careful ones, routed to an LLC that, with one more phone call, turned out to belong to a man named Marcus Heller. Vanessa's previous fiancé. The one she'd been engaged to 14 months before meeting Dom. The one who had quietly settled a civil suit against her for misappropriated funds before it ever went public. The accountant, a soft-spoken man named Philip who'd done Dom's books for a decade and had clearly seen this exact heartbreak in other clients before, slid the final report across his desk and said only, I'm sorry, Dom. I wish it were something smaller. How long would it have taken? Dom asked. If nobody had ever looked? Philip considered the question seriously. At this pace? 18 months before the account was empty enough to notice on its own. Maybe 2 years before you'd have had any reason to ask. 2 years. He thought about that number for a long time afterward, about how close he had come to losing everything slowly enough to never see it happening. If not for a child who'd been brave enough to interrupt a wedding nobody else in that chapel had the courage to stop. He laid the report on the kitchen counter on a Tuesday evening and said nothing, just watched her eyes move across the numbers. I can explain all of this, Vanessa said, her voice gone smooth. The voice she used on his mother, the voice she used at the altar. Don't, Dom said. Just tell me if it's true. Something shifted in her face then. Not shame, not grief, but a flat, exhausted calculation. Like a woman recalculating odds after a card had turned over she hadn't expected. You have no idea what it's like, she said quietly. To grow up watching your mother smile at men with money and pretend it isn't a transaction. Love is a story people tell themselves to feel less foolish about what they're actually doing. She looked at him almost with pity. I would have made you happy, Dominic. I'm very good at that part. An 8-year-old heard you say my name on the phone the same way you said his, Dom said. Like I was already finished. Like you'd already cashed me in. She didn't deny it. That silence stayed with him longer than any confession would have. It might have ended there, quietly, privately, the way these things sometimes do when the wronged man has enough money and lawyers to make a problem disappear without a headline. But Vanessa's family had spent decades protecting their name by being louder than the truth whenever the truth threatened to be inconvenient. And they did not intend to stop now. Within a week, Dom's mother received a call from Eleanor Calloway, Vanessa's mother, her voice dripping with practiced concern. I understand my daughter has made mistakes, Eleanor said. But Dominic is the one tearing this family apart over hearsay from a child and some paperwork an accountant could spin any way he liked. People talk, Carol. Do you really want it known that your son's marriage ended because he believed a maid's granddaughter over his own wife? His mother, to her credit in that single moment, did not immediately agree, but neither did she defend him outright. "I just don't want a scandal," she told Dom that evening, twisting her hands the way she did when she was choosing comfort over courage. "Surely there's a quieter way to handle this. People will say you're the kind of man who lets children dictate his decisions. They'll laugh at you, Dominic. They already laughed at an 8-year-old for telling the truth," Dom said. "I'd rather be laughed at for believing her than be the kind of man who let her be right and did nothing about it." It got worse before it got better. Word moved through their circle the way it always does. Fast, distorted, designed to protect whoever told it last. By the following week, 2 of Vanessa's friends had called Dom directly to suggest, gently, that he was having some kind of breakdown. That grief over a failing marriage was making him paranoid, that surely a forensic accountant could be persuaded to find whatever a wounded client paid him to find. Someone, he never confirmed who, leaked a partial, twisted version of the story to a local society blog, which ran an item suggesting that Dominic Reyes had humiliated his bride by accusing her of fraud based on playground gossip from a member of the household staff's family. The comments underneath were worse than the article. "Imagine letting some kid ruin a marriage. This is what happens when rich men marry beneath their judgment and then can't admit it. Poor Vanessa." Ruth called him the morning it ran, her voice tight with a fear he hadn't heard from her since the day at the chapel. "Mr. Reyes, they're saying Michelle made it all up for money. They're saying I coached her. I've got a woman down the street who won't let her own granddaughter play with mine anymore because of it. I told you this would happen. I told you this is exactly what happens to people like us." "I know," Dom said. "I'm going to fix it." "You can't fix what people already decided to believe," Ruth said, and for the first time in their short acquaintance, she sounded defeated rather than careful. "Believe me, I've tried my whole life." He sat with that sentence for a long time after he hung up the phone. Michelle stopped talking about it after that. Stopped asking him questions when he came by on Sundays. Stopped meeting his eyes the way she used to. One evening he found her sitting alone on the back steps long after dinner, knees pulled up, staring at nothing in particular. "You okay, kid?" he asked, sitting beside her. "A girl at school said my grandma's a liar and I'm a liar too, and that you're only being nice to us because you feel sorry for us." She didn't look at him when she said it. "Is that true? Do you just feel sorry for us?" The question landed somewhere deep and uncomfortable. "No," he said slowly, choosing every word like it mattered, because it did. "I came back because you were right and everyone else was wrong, including me, for 40 whole minutes at that altar. That's not pity, Michelle. That's a debt. There's a difference." She considered that with the same seriousness she gave to everything. "What's the difference?" "Pity makes you feel small so somebody else can feel good about helping you," Dom said. "A debt means I owe you something real, and I intend to pay it, whether anybody else believes you or not." He paused. "I believe you. I believed you the day I sat at your grandmother's table and you handed me back a drawing I'd let myself forget. That's not going to change because some blog wrote something cruel." Michelle was quiet for a long moment. Then, very small, "What if it never stops? What if people always think I'm the girl who lied at the wedding?" Dom didn't have a clean answer for that, and he didn't pretend to. "Then we make sure enough people eventually know the truth that it stops mattering what the rest of them think," he said. "I can't promise you it'll be fast. I can promise you I'm not going anywhere until it's done." It was the first time he meant a promise to anyone the way he should have meant his vows. He spent the next 2 months building a case nobody could call hearsay. He went back to Philip and had the financial report independently verified by a second firm, one with no connection to him or his company, so nobody could claim it had been bought. He tracked down Marcus Heller's old civil suit through public court records and, after several uncomfortable phone calls, got Marcus himself, bitter, still a little burned, but more than willing, to put his account on record. He found 2 other former employees of the Calloway household, women who'd left under circumstances eerily similar to Ruth's, who agreed, carefully, quietly, to corroborate what they'd witnessed over the years once they understood someone with resources was finally willing to stand behind them instead of asking them to carry it alone. Took patience. Took money he didn't begrudge spending. And slowly, piece by piece, The truth stopped being one child's word against a polished woman's denial, and became something that could survive being looked at directly. The annulment hearing was private, as these things usually are, but Dom made one decision his lawyers advised against and he refused to abandon. He requested that Ruth and Michelle be allowed to attend, not to testify, not to be paraded in front of anyone, but simply to be present in the room when the truth was formally entered into the record. Because somebody owes them the chance to watch the truth win for once, he told his lawyer, in front of the very people who decided it couldn't be true. Vanessa's mother was there. Eleanor Calloway sat in the second row in a gray suit with her hands folded, her composure cracking by visible degrees as Philip's report was read aloud, as Marcus Heller's statement was entered, as the second independent accountant confirmed every figure without hesitation. When it was over, when the judge granted the annulment on grounds of fraud, cleanly, without ambiguity, Eleanor turned in her seat and looked back at Ruth and Michelle sitting quietly near the door. For a moment nobody said anything. Then Eleanor stood, smoothed her skirt and walked over. Not to apologize, not exactly, but close enough that the room noticed. "I owe your granddaughter something," she said to Ruth stiffly, the words clearly costing her more than she wanted to pay. "I let my daughter convince me a child was lying because it was easier than believing what I already suspected about her. That was wrong of me. It wasn't much. It would never undo a single canceled sleepover or a single whispered insult in a school hallway." But Michelle, sitting beside her grandmother in a hallway full of lawyers, heard a grown woman in an expensive suit admit, out loud in front of witnesses, that she had been right. Ruth's hand found Michelle's on the bench between them and held it. The public version of the story took longer to settle than the legal one. The same society blog that had run the cruel item about playground gossip eventually ran a follow-up, far less gleeful, once the annulment became public record and a local reporter, tipped off, Dom suspected though never confirmed, by Philip himself, who had grown fond of Ruth's coffee during the long weeks of preparing the case, wrote a longer piece that finally got the order of events right. The headline this time read, "8-year-old's wedding warning confirmed." Inside the fraud behind Charleston's most talked about annulment. People who had laughed found, suddenly, less to say. The mother who'd forbidden her daughter from playing with Michelle called Ruth, awkward and apologetic, to ask if the girls might have a playdate sometime. Now that things had cleared up, Ruth, with more grace than the woman deserved, said she'd think about it, and later told Dom over coffee that she had absolutely no intention of saying yes anytime soon, and Dom laughed for the first time in months at something that wasn't bitter. What grew out of the wreckage wasn't romance. Dom was deliberate about that, careful, almost stubborn, refusing to let a child's bravery become the setup for a tidy ending where the rich man falls for the grateful single grandmother and everyone's pain gets folded neatly into a happy bow. What grew instead was something steadier. A standing Sunday dinner at Ruth's kitchen table. A table he kept stocked now, in a house whose deed he'd quietly transferred into Ruth's name the year before, over weeks of her refusing before finally accepting, on the condition, she insisted, that it never be spoken of outside that kitchen. Michelle did homework across from him on those Sunday evenings and asked him questions about how buildings got built, how concrete cured, why some houses leaned and others didn't, and Ruth told him, slowly and more each week, everything she'd seen and known for years with no one willing to listen. He hired Ruth outright to manage his own household, at triple what the Callaways had ever paid her, and made sure, deliberately and more than once, that anyone who'd ever doubted her understood exactly what she had risked to tell the truth, and exactly how right she'd been. On the one-year anniversary of the wedding that never should have stood, Dom found Michelle on the porch steps with a math worksheet and a juice box. "Hey kid," he said, sitting beside her. "Can I ask you something? That day, at the wedding, were you scared?" She thought about it seriously, the way she thought about everything. "Yeah," she said. "I thought everybody was gonna hate me. Did that stop you?" "No." She shrugged, like the answer was obvious. "Grandma says the truth doesn't care if you're scared of it. It just needs somebody to say it out loud." Dom looked out at the yard, at the bottle cap wind chime catching the same gold light as the day everything almost went wrong, and thought that he'd spent 34 years learning to read a room before signing anything, and it took an 8-year-old girl in a borrowed cardigan to teach him the one thing none of those years ever had. Sometimes the only honest voice in a crowded room belongs to the person everyone else already decided not to listen to. "Thank you," he said again, and meant it just as much as the first time. Michelle smiled, small and shy, and pulled the old crayon drawing out from inside her math folder. The house with too many windows, the three figures standing out front, and slid it across the step toward him. "You can have it for real this time," she said. "So you don't lose it again." Dom took it carefully, the way you take something you intend to keep for good, and folded it back along its worn creases, while behind them in the house, Ruth sang along, off-key and unbothered, to something playing low on the kitchen radio. One question before you leave. If an 8-year-old stopped your wedding and warned you that your future spouse would destroy your life, would you listen? Type yes or a no in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next unforgettable story. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.